stories you will see within these chapters center around a decade, which saw much turmoil and destruction, by illness, starvation, and deaths, to most American families throughout this country. The decade was the 1860s, when thunder and lightning could be seen in the distance, and the winds swept in from every direction over our young republic. When the storm finally broke, it would soak our fields and bodies. Not with rain, but with blood. They called this storm, the American Civil War. These stories are about the men who fought and the families that suffered from losses, sickness, hunger, and deaths. For all the soldiers and the innocents lost, who gave the ultimate price, to preserve our fragile union. For all those who lived through it, they told their stories verbally or by documents they left behind. Their stories will come to light, by the Cammett's families, that lived during those trying times in our nation's history. Charles Henry Cammett was born in Amesbury, Massachusetts on July 15, 1841, the son of Samuel Shackford Cammett and Elizabeth Betsy Coombs. He was the first of 11 known children born to Samuel and Betsy. At the age of 19, he meets and marries Maria Frances Parker, aged 15, at Groveland, Massachusetts, in 1860. Maria, born on April 5, 1845, in Bradford, Massachusetts, was the daughter of Gilman Parker, a shoemaker, and Sophie Hopkinson. A year after their marriage, the Civil War erupted, so Charles and his brothers George and Daniel and their cousin Jonathan would enlist in the army. Charles would enlist in Company F in the 17th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment on the 26th of April 1861 in Groveland, Massachusetts. He joined his unit on July 22, 1861, at Camp Schouyler in Lynnfield, Massachusetts under the command of Colonel Thomas J.C. Amory. In June 1861, Daniel and Jonathan Cammett would enlist in Company B of the 40th New York Infantry for 3 years, but Daniel was reported as deserted, but he was in fact transferred into the 17th Massachusetts. Jonathan would remain in the 40th New York, Daniel transferred to the 17th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment in Company D, for 3 years, on July 27, 1861, in Amesbury, Massachusetts. Therefore, Daniel and Charles served together in the 17th Massachusetts, although in different companies. The following is a timeline and locations of the 17th Infantry as they moved through the country seeking out the enemy. On July 9, by special order, the companies comprising this regiment, including those of Captain Day and Captain McNamara, of this town, ordered to report to the Adjutant General at Lynnfield, Massachusetts. They left Massachusetts on August 23, for Baltimore, Maryland. Attached to Dix's command, Baltimore, Maryland. March 12, ordered to New Bern, North Carolina. April, assigned to 1st Brigade, 1st Division, Department of North Carolina. Foster's expedition, the Battle of Goldsboro, December 11 to the 20th, included the battles of Kinston and Whitehall. Then in January 1863 the 17th was assigned to 1st Brigade, 1st Division, 18th Army Corps, Department of North Carolina. The book Memorial History of the 17th Regiment, Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry, written by Thomas Kerwin and Henry Splain, provides detailed coverage of the 17th, events in the Civil War from 1861 to 1865. It is accessible online through the Internet Archive. The book includes 3 pages about Cammett enlistments and special chapters for each company within the regiment. The comments mentions were Charles, Daniel and Frank. Charles's commanding officer of the 17th Massachusetts was Colonel Thomas J.C. Amory. He continued to serve in North Carolina until March 1864. He was then assigned to a general command of the force south of Trent River and on July 5, to a sub-district of Beaufort. Who was this man that commanded the 17th Massachusetts? Where did he come from? What was his background? Colonel Amory was the son of Jonathan Amory from West Roxbury, born on November 27, 1828. He was nominated by ex-President John Quincy Adams, then in Congress, was appointed a cadet at West Point and graduated in 1851. He was then appointed as a second lieutenant in the 7th United States Infantry at Fort Smith, Arkansas. In 1853, he married Mary B. Nolan at Fort Smith, and they had 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. Mary's father, Mr. Nolan, was a planter in Arkansas near Fort Smith. He was also attached to the 7th United States Infantry. Colonel Amory now is stationed in Beaufort, North Carolina with his wife and 4 children nearby. Sometime in late September his wife, Mary, became ill with fever and headaches. These symptoms went away but reoccurred several days later, but much worse. Now, her eyes and skin were turning yellow. Unfortunately, she contracted yellow fever and passed away on October 3, 1864, in Beaufort, North Carolina. The colonel, while attending her funeral, was also stricken and died 4 days later on the 7th of October. In the Springfield Daily Republican newspaper, their joint obituary on October 18, 1864 wrote the following: at Beaufort, North Carolina, on the 3rd of yellow fever, Mary P. N., 23, wife of Colonel Thomas J. C. Amory, 7th, Colonel Thomas J. C. Amory, 35, son of Jonathan Amory of Boston. Later in his obituary it was written, "It may be said of him and of his wife, in the touching words of the psalmist, they were lovely in their lives, and in their deaths they were not divided." He was brevetted as Brigadier General of Volunteers, which was a tribute to his bravery in the service of his country. Private Charles Cammett mustered out of the 17th Massachusetts at Boston on April 26, 1863. He was granted a disability, and returned home, but not for long. Even his disability could not overcome his deepest feeling about the war that took so many lives. After a brief 3-month stay at home, unknown to him at the time, he had impregnated his wife, because he re-enlisted on August 4, 1863, as a private in the 3rd Massachusetts Heavy Artillery, for a 3-year term, receiving a total bounty of $225. This unit, formed from companies defending the Massachusetts coast, likely appealed to him because he was stationed at Fort Independence, located on Castle Island, in Boston Harbor, about 40 miles from his home at Groveland. Private Cammett's Army records with the 3rd include more than 25 muster rolls. These documents provide a timeline of his activities and accomplishments during his military career in the 3rd. This information will be combined with details about his family life to better understand his life experiences. Company muster roll beginning from August 14, 63 to August 31, 1863, present, remarks, present. Company muster roll for September to October, 1863, present. Company muster roll for November to December, 1863, present, remarks, on duty as boatman since December 29, per Special Order Number 140. On December 28, 1863, Amelia gave birth to her first child, a son, in Groveland, Massachusetts. He remained unnamed at birth, probably awaiting Charles's return from Boston. They later named their son Leroy Parker Cammett. His birth record listed his parents as Charles H. S. Cammett and Maria F. Parker, born in Groveland, with Charles's occupation recorded as a shoemaker. Private Cammett is back to his unit as recorded in his company muster roll for January to February, 1864, present, without any remarks. Also present for March to April, 1864, present, remarks. Veteran enlisted April 26, 61. Discharged, April 24, 63, from Company F, 17th Mass, installment $50. Editorial note: for whatever reason they placed Private Cammett's previous enlistment record on this roll. About 4 months after giving birth, Amelia's health never recovered. She grew weaker and weaker as each day passed, then on April 8, 1864, at the age of 19 years old, she passes away from tuberculosis. Her death record listed her name, Maria F. Cammett Parker, daughter of William and Sophia. She was buried in Riverside Cemetery in Groveland, Massachusetts, in the Cammett's family plots. After burying his wife, and providing for the care of his son with his father, Samuel, Charles returns to his unit as recorded in his company muster rolls for May and June, 1864, present. Remarks, appointed Corporal June 27, 1864. Company muster rolls for July to August, 1864, present. Remarks, reduced from corporal by request July 1, 1864. Veteran enlisted April 26, 1861. Discharged April 24, 1863, Company F-17th, Massachusetts. Installment $50, editorial note, refers to his veteran bonus payments and past service records. Corporal Cammett held his rank for only 6 days. I believe the following facts contributed to that outcome. First, his wife's death, 4 months earlier. Second, Charles learned that his brother Daniel had returned home from the 17th Massachusetts on sick leave with a serious lung disease and passed away suddenly. It is believed that Charles went home to see his brother who died on June 2, which resulted in his demotion to private as noted in his July and August muster rolls. Daniel's story will be covered after completing Charles's life story. Private Cammett is back to his unit as reported in his company muster rolls for September to October, 1864, present. Remarks, on daily duty in magazine at Fort Simmons, Washington, D.C. Company muster rolls for January to February, 1865, present. Remarks, on duty in magazine at Fort Stevens, Washington, D.C. Veteran bounty due 4th installment $50. Company muster rolls for March to April, 1865, present. Remarks, due United States for transportation, $20. Company muster rolls for May to June, 1865, absent. Remarks, due United States for transportation, $20.48. On detached service at headquarters, 1st Brigade, Hardin's Division, 22nd Army Corps. Special Order, 23. June 18, 65. Vet Bounty. Editorial note, this unit is a brigade band. Company muster rolls for July to August, 1865, present. Remarks, due soldier for clothing not drawn $46. Veteran bounty, due 8th, installment $50. Charles's Army records within the 3rd Heavy Artillery with a different description such as, appears on return as follows. These records list dates of assignments back and forth into the unit from different areas and situations. First entry, July to September 1864, 8th Unattached Company Massachusetts Company H Artillery. On daily duty in magazine. October 1864, on daily duty in magazine Fort Simmons, D.C. November 1864, on duty assistant to ordnances sergeant in magazine. December 1864, to February 1865, Company D on duty assistant to ordnances sergeant in magazine. March 1865, absent on furlough to February 16, 1865. May 1865, on duty in magazine. The last entry, June to July 1865, absent detail service at headquarters 1st Brigade, Hardin's Division, 22nd Army Corps. Special Order 23. June 11, 65. On September 18, 1865, Private Charles Henry Cammett of the 3rd Regiment Massachusetts Heavy Artillery was discharged in Washington, D.C. He was last paid on December 31, 1864, with a clothing payment of $52 and a bounty of $225. He owed $6 for arms and equipment. Though Charles's war ended, the Civil War continued until April 9, 1865, when General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant, marking the Confederate Army's defeat. After leaving the army, Charles resumed his shoemaking career to support families. He also took care of his 2-year-old son, Leroy, who had been with his grandfather, Samuel, since his mother's death the year before. Charles transitioned to civilian life in the spring of 1865. During the summer, he met Abby Stover, a widow whose husband, Andrew Stover, served as a sergeant in the 20th Maine Infantry. Andrew sustained a severe wound to his right leg, necessitating amputation, during a battle prior to the Battle of Petersburg on June 20, 1864. He subsequently passed away at David's Island Hospital in New York on July 1, 1864, at the age of 23. Andrew married 18-year-old Abby in October 1861. Entering the army 1 year after their marriage bore no children. On a cool fall day, on October 20, 1866, Charles married Abby Stover. It was both their second marriages. Charles was 25 and Abby 23. Abby was born on August 29, 1843, in Thomas, Knox, Maine, the daughter of Samuel and Mary Dean Wiggin. Approximately 2 years later, on August 25, 1868, Elizabeth Maria Cammett was born in Groveland, Massachusetts. The daughter of Charles H. and Abby M. Wiggin, her father's a shoemaker born in Amesbury, her mother born in South Thomaston, Maine. Her middle name, Marie, was chosen in memory of Charles's first wife. The 1870 census, dated July 16, documents the family together for the first time. Charles, aged 27, is employed as a shoemaker with a personal estate valued at $300. Abby, 25, is managing household duties. Leroy, 6, is attending school, while Lizzie, 2, is also recorded. At this time, Abby is in poor health and physically frail. On December 9, 1870, Abby M. Cammett passed away from consumption in Groveland, Massachusetts. Her death records indicated she was married, but no other information such as her age or the names of her parents were recorded. The disease that had claimed Charles's first wife now visits him once again to claim his second wife. Abby was laid to rest in the family plots beside Maria, his first wife, in Riverside Cemetery in Groveland. 6 months later, Charles's father, Samuel Shackford Cammett, died on June 30, 1874, from liver disease and dropsy. His death record lists his parents as Silas and Ann, both born in Chester, New Hampshire. Samuel's death record helps confirm Brent and Steve's shared great-grandparents, Silas Cammett Jr. and Sarah Ann C.V., who are their shared fourth great-grandparents. More about them and other Cammett family's stories in other chapters. Samuel in his last will and testament, declared the following: Hear in all men by their presence that I Samuel S. Comment of Amesbury County of Essex, being of sound and disposing mind and memory, do make and public this my last will and testament. First, I order my executor to pay all my just debts, funeral expenses, and also erect a stone curbstone around my cemetery plot, and also suitable stone to my grave. Second, I giveth my wife Betsy, at all of my personal estate for her own use and disposal. Absorb the income of all my real estate during her life for her own use and disposal. Third, I give my son George Cammett $150. And to my son Stephen Cammett at $150, also to my daughter, Sarah Ford, $25. Also to my daughter Mercy Elizabeth Hopkinson $100. Also to my daughter Martha Cammett $100. Also my daughter Jane Huntress, $100. Also my son Charles Cammett $100. And also Etta Cammett $100. And to Etta the red organ, now in my house and leaving in my family along as she remains single. Fourth, the remainder of all my estate, both real and personal, I give to my son Samuel Cammett for his own use and disposal. Fifth, I appoint my son, Samuel Cammett, executor of this my last will and testament, and order him to not pay any of the aforenamed legacies until after the death of his mother, as she is to have, as before stated, during her lifetime. So there were 9 children mentioned in his will. Daniel died during the Civil War, so that would make 10 children, of which Ellen Abbey Cammett was not accounted for. She was the seconded last child born and still living at the time. About 5 months after his father's death, he met and married a 21-year-old girl named Henrietta Dorr. Everybody called her Etta. She was born August 4, 1853 in Bradford, Massachusetts. The daughter of Benjamin Lewis Dorr and Maida Jane Marble Dorr. Charles and Etta married on November 1, 1874 in Groveland, Massachusetts, he for the third, her first. Charles and Etta's first child, Horace Dorr Cammett, was born on June 12, 1875, in Groveland. But again, another tragedy would befall Charles and his new wife. Horace would die 4 days after his birth. He was laid to rest within the family plots in Riverside Cemetery in Groveland. On December 13, 1876 in Georgetown, Massachusetts, an unnamed female was born to Charles and Etta. They decided to name her Ethel. Then Louise Florence Cammett was born on December 23, 1879 in Groveland. In the 1880 census, we find Charles is recorded as working in shoemaking at age 37, Henrietta is keeping house, age 26, Lizzie is attending school at age 11, while Ethel, age 3, and Louise, 12 months, are both at home. The only one not home was Leroy, who is now 15 years old, because he was helping on the farm of his aunt and uncle, Samuel and Eliza. Also living there is Samuel's sister, Ella, who Samuel has been taken care of since his father's passing, who is now 9 years old. Their farm is in Amesbury, Massachusetts. In 1882, on September 4, Charles Woodbury was born in Groveland, Massachusetts. His only birth record found was his United States Mason membership card, but his marriage records revealed his parents' name as Charles and Etta. The same record was found for his brother, Clarence Russell Cammett, who was born on August 30, 1885, in Groveland, Massachusetts. Clarence was the last of 5 children born to Charles and Etta. In that same year, Charles' firstborn, Leroy, age 22, would fall in love with a pretty 18-year-old divorced English girl from Bedfordshire, England. Her name was Amelia Maud Dickens. They married on October 21, 1885. Their first son, Harry Parker Cammett, was born on January 1, 1886, in Amesbury. But yet again, another tragedy befalls the Cammetts once again. Leroy, Charles's firstborn son, comes down with typhoid fever and never recovers, and dies on October 14, 1887 at the age of 23, leaving his wife and a 1-year-old son. Leroy Parker was laid to rest with his brother, Horace Dorr, in the Cammett's family plots at Riverside Cemetery in Groveland, Massachusetts. Leroy's only son, Harry Parker Cammett, would live a long life and reach the age of 85. He too would be buried at Riverside Cemetery along with his family. In the 1890s, every veteran had to report in the 11th Census of the United States for surviving soldiers and widows. Charles reported as a private in the 17th Massachusetts Infantry and the 3rd Massachusetts Heavy Artillery that year. In the census of 1900, the family is still living in Groveland. Charles, now 56, has chosen to be a full-time undertaker. Etta, now 46, is keeping house. Louise is now 21, Charles, 17, Clarence is 14. And his daughter, who was recently married, and now known as Ethel Mitchell, age 23 years old, are all living with Charles. Both his sons are in the shoe business making soles. In August 1907, at 66, Charles filed his last will and testament in probate court, likely due to declining health. In his will he declares the following clauses or items. First, I direct my executives to erect a suitable monument on my lot, in the last editions of the Groveland Cemetery, provided that I shall not have erected a monument on said lot before my deceased, and I also direct him to pay the inhabitants of Groveland the sum of $100 for the perpetual care and repair of my said lot. Second, I give and bequest upon my daughter, Lizzie Cammett Colby, the sum of $1. Third, I give and bequest upon Harry Cammett, son of my deceased son, Leroy P. Cammett, the sum of $1. Fourth, I give and bequest upon my daughter, Ethel M. Mitchell, the sum of $200. Fifth, I give it a bequest upon my daughter, Louisa F. Cammett, the sum of $200. Sixth, I give it and bequest upon my son, C. Woodbury Cammett, the sum of $200. Seventh, I give and bequest upon my son, C. Russell Cammett, the sum of $200. Eighth, I give and devise unto my wife, Harrietta C. Cammett, the land and building constituting the homestead situated on Union and Gardner Street in the said, Groveland, to have and to hold during the term of her natural life. Upon the decease of my said wife, I give and devise said homestead and the premises connected herewith to Ethel M. Mitchell, Louise F. Cammett, C. Woodbury Cammett and C. Russell Cammett and their heirs forever. 9. All the rest residue and remainder of my estate, of which I shall die seized and possessed, and to which I shall be in any way entitled at the time of my decease, I give advice and bequest to my said wife, and to her heirs and assign forever. 10th, I constitute and appoint George Mitchell Jr. the executor of my last will, and I request that he be exempt from furnishing any security on his official bond. In witness thereof I hereunto set my hand and seal this 17th day of August A.D. 1907. Signed, Charles H. Cammett. In the census of 1910, the family is still living in Groveland. Charles is now 68, and an undertaker, Harrietta 56, Charles W. 27, is a salesman and still single, and Clarence 24, is a clerk in a law office and single. In the Haverhill, Massachusetts directory of 1914, we find Charles Cammett living at 16 Union Street, occupation, undertaker, also living there, his wife Harrietta C. and his sons Charles W., occupation a salesman, and his son, Charles Russell Cammett, a lawyer in Haverhill. In the 1915 director Charles Russell Cammett was appointed Justice of the Peace. We are sure that at this time, Charles was suffering severe headaches and increased pressure around his brain. These would eventually cause his death on April 1, 1914, because he was suffering from patchy meningitis, which was listed as a cause of death in his death certificate. Patchy meningitis is a rare medical condition in which the outer layer of the brain or spinal cord, called the dura mater, thickens and becomes inflamed. Symptoms vary based on the location of the affected area of dura mater but can include headaches and face pain. His son Russell was the informant on his death certificate. His parents were listed as Samuel S. Cammett, birthplace, Chester, New Hampshire, and Betsy Coombs, birthplace, Stratham, New Hampshire. He was buried in Riverview Cemetery on April 4, 1914. That follows is his obituary and burial details. Charles's obituary was published in the Boston Globe on April 2, 1914, on page 2. It also appeared in the Boston Transcript, part of a genealogical book of U.S. newspapers taken from the Northeast, covering the years 1704 through 1930. His obituary reads as follows. Charles Cammett dead. Groveland's Civil War veteran, was nearly 50 years in undertaking business. Haverhill, April 1st, Charles Cammett, age 72, died today at his home on Union Street, Groveland. He was born at Amesbury but removed here in boyhood. When the 17th Massachusetts Regiment was recruited in 1861, Mr. Cammett enlisted in Company F. He was in the battles of Kingston, New Bern, Whitehall, and Goldsboro. After discharge for disability in 1863, he sought enlistment in the heavy artillery with Company D of the 3rd Massachusetts and returned to the South for 2 more years of service. Upon his return, Mr. Cammett engaged in the undertaking business, which he followed for nearly 50 years. He was a cemetery commissioner for the town and was a member of the Groveland Congregational Church. Besides his wife, Mr. Cammett is survived by two daughters, Mrs. George Mitchell of this town and Mrs. George Hill of Malden, two sons, Charles Woodbury and Charles Russell Cammett, both of this town, and three sisters. See that Charles and Etta filed for a Civil War pension right after his discharge from the 17th Massachusetts Infantry on June 15, 1863. She once again filed after Charles' death from the state of Massachusetts on the 22nd of April 1914. After Charlie's death, we find her in the 1920 census living with her son Clarence Russell Cammett at the family home on 16 Union Street in Groveland. Henrietta is 66 years old, widow of Clarence, 34 years old, still single, and a lawyer. But Clarence would finally marry the same year to Mildred Iden Nichols and move out, leaving his 68-year-old mother. Then 15 years later, in the 1935 Haverhill City Directory, we find Henrietta, a widow of Charles, living alone at 16 Union Street in Groveland. Just below Henrietta's information we see another Cammett listed. Mildred I, widow C. Russell, reporter Haverhill Gazette, 20 Union Street. This Mildred is Marietta's daughter-in-law, the wife of Clarence. The only problem was, he was not dead. Eventually they must have worked out whatever differences they had because they continued their married life together. But Henrietta would never know if her son and daughter-in-law would ever get back together because, within that same year, she would fall ill and passed away on the 6th of July 1935 in Groveland. She was 82 years old. On Monday morning her obituary appeared in the Boston Globe on July 8, on page 21, and it read as follows: Cammett, in Groveland, Massachusetts, July 6, at 16 Union Street. Henrietta C. D. Cammett, widow of Charles H. Cammett. Services at home Wednesday afternoon at 3 o'clock. Relatives and friends invited. Burial in Riverview Cemetery. Henrietta was laid to rest beside her husband Charles and his two other wives, Maria F. Parker and Abby M. Stover. On the opposite side of their stone are the Mitchells. Their daughter, Ethel Cammett, married George Mitchell Jr. Also buried here, in separate graves, are the following family members: their daughter and husband, Louise Cammett Hill and Charles F. Hill, and their daughter and her husband, Marjorie Hill Braxton and Winston B. Braxton. Their son Clarence Russell Cammett and his wife Mildred Iden Nichols Cammett. Clarence and his sister, Louise, gravestone are of the exact same design. Lastly, Horace Cammett, son of Henrietta Dorr, who was buried beside his half-brother, Leroy Parker Cammett, son of Maria Frances Parker. Also Leroy Parker Cammett's son's family, Henry Parker Cammett and his two wives, Jessie M., and his divorced wife Nina Bell Emerson Cammett Payne Bianco, and their son Leroy P. and his wife Edna M. Charles has 19 family members that are buried here with him in Riverview Cemetery. Their son Charles Woodbury and his family are buried in Linwood Cemetery in Haverhill, Massachusetts. His only daughter with Abby was Elizabeth Lizzie Maria Cammett, who married George Colby. Their information so far as eluded us. All their burial information and locations are available on Find a Grave, a website owned by Ancestry.com, but all contents and upkeep provided by its members. This concludes the remarkable life story of Charles Henry Cammett and his family during one of our nation's trying times in which to live. Next are the stories of his two brothers, Daniel and George, and their first cousin Jonathan Plummer Cammett.